Imagine you open YouTube late at night, and there it is, a grainy elevator camera. A young woman in an oversized red hoodie stepping in, pressing a row of buttons, and then moving in a way that feels wrong. She ducks into the corner as if hiding from someone, then suddenly steps out of the hallway, peering left and right. She comes back in, waves her hands in the air in strange, fluid motions, almost like she's talking to someone you can't see. The elevator doors never close. And then, halfway through the clip, she walks out of frame for the last time. 2 weeks later, her body is found in a water tank on the roof of the building. That 4-minute video would turn a real young woman's death into one of the most viral mysteries on the internet. Before we get into it, a quick heads up. This story involves mental illness, a missing person, and a disturbing death. Nothing here is shown visually, but some details may be heavy for some viewers. Please take care of yourself as you listen. Tonight we're going to walk step by step through what we actually know about Elisa Lam's final days, what's really in that elevator footage, why the Cecil Hotel has the reputation it does, and how a clash between online theories and the official explanation turned one young woman's tragedy into a kind of digital campfire story for millions of strangers. We'll move in layers, first the hook, then the people, then the night she vanished, the investigation, and finally the theories and what they say about us as an audience. Let's start far away from downtown Los Angeles, up in Vancouver, Canada, where Elisa Lam grew up. Elisa was born on April 30th, 1991, to immigrant parents from Hong Kong. She was a student at the University of British Columbia, and like a lot of 21-year-olds in 2013, she kept an active online presence. On her Tumblr blog, she wrote about books, fashion, and also about struggling with depression and bipolar disorder. She was open about periods where she felt low, overwhelmed, or disconnected. For her, travel was supposed to be something positive, an adventure to break up the academic grind and boost her spirits. In late January of 2013, Elisa decided to take a solo trip down the west coast of the United States. She took the train and bus through California, stopping first in San Diego and then heading toward Los Angeles. She called home every day. That detail matters. Her parents in Vancouver were involved, attentive, and very aware that their daughter was traveling alone and living with a serious mental health condition. When the calls stopped, they noticed immediately. When Elisa arrived in Los Angeles on January 28th, she checked into a building that would later loom large over every discussion of her case. The Cecil Hotel, technically, at that point, branded as the Stay on Main. It's a tall, 1920s Beaux-Arts-style building at 640 South Main Street, right near Skid Row. Built in 1924 as a fancy business hotel, it slid down the socio-economic ladder over the decades. By the time Elisa stayed there, it was this strange hybrid, part budget tourist hostel, part long-term low-income housing. The hotel's history is a whole other character in this story. There have been so many deaths, suicides, and violent incidents associated with the Cecil that it has its own dedicated lists just for those cases. At least 16 sudden or unexplained deaths have been documented in or around the building. In the 1980s, serial killer Richard Ramirez, known as the Night Stalker, stayed there during part of his killing spree. In 1991, Austrian serial killer Jack Unterweger also lived there while he murdered at least 3 women in Los Angeles. The building's reputation, and rumors that even the Black Dahlia was seen there before her death, helped inspire the season Hotel of American Horror Story. By the 2000s, the Cecil had a new management strategy, split the building. Some floors were Stay on Main, marketed to young travelers with bright branding and cheap rates. Other floors housed long-term, extremely low-income residents, many of whom were dealing with addiction, homelessness, or serious mental illness. For American viewers, that's important context. In a lot of U.S. cities, older hotels end up functioning as de facto welfare housing. Day to day, staff are dealing with overdoses, psychotic episodes, fights, and people in crisis. A former manager later said that bizarre behavior was basically normal there, which helps explain a chilling detail we'll come back to. When Elisa started acting strangely, staff didn't treat it like an emergency. When Elisa first checked in, she was put in a shared room, hostel style, on one of the Stay on Main floors. But her roommates complained. They told staff that her behavior was odd and made them uncomfortable. In response, the hotel moved Elisa to a single-occupancy room on the 5th floor. We don't have a full, objective record of what odd meant in that context, but later reporting and the coroner's summary note that she was on multiple psychiatric medications, and that her bipolar disorder had required hospitalization at least once before. Despite that, there are also glimpses of Elisa acting like any excited young traveler. On January 31st, the day we last know she was seen alive, she visited a nearby independent bookstore called The Last Bookstore. An employee later remembered her as friendly and talkative. Elisa mentioned buying books and a gift for her family, and asked about the weight of the books because she'd be carrying them as she continued her trip. To that clerk, she didn't seem frightened, paranoid, or under the influence. She seemed like a shy but enthusiastic customer. That evening, Elisa was seen back at the hotel. At some point that night, she recorded the final entries on her phone and, possibly, on her Tumblr queue, posts that would continue going up even after she disappeared, which later fed some of the stranger theories. On February 1st, she was supposed to check out of the Cecil and head north toward Santa Cruz. She never did. When Elisa didn't call home that day, her parents were immediately alarmed. When another day passed with no contact, they reported her missing to Los Angeles authorities. On February 6th, her parents flew down from Vancouver to help in the search. The LAPD began checking hospitals, shelters, and the area around the hotel. They used dogs to search parts of the property, including some of the roof areas, but found nothing. For now, remember that detail: the dogs, the roof, nothing found. It's one of those puzzle pieces that would later make people doubt the official story. For about a week, the search stayed a fairly standard missing person case. Local investigators talked to staff, guests, anyone who might have seen her. Elisa's belongings, including medications, clothes, and her laptop, were still in her room. There were no obvious signs of a struggle. But there was surveillance footage, and that would change everything. On February 13th, with no solid leads, LAPD did something very common in American missing person cases. They turned to the public. They released a surveillance clip from one of the hotel's elevators, recorded on January 31st, the night Elisa vanished. They hoped someone might recognize her and come forward. Instead, they accidentally dropped gasoline on the internet. You've probably seen it. Elisa steps into the elevator wearing a red zip-up hoodie, a dark skirt, and sandals. She leans forward and presses several buttons in a column. Some people say it looks like she presses them all. Then she retreats into the back corner, to the left of the control panel, as if waiting for the doors to close. But they don't. After a few seconds, she sidles forward, quickly peeks into the hallway to her right, then jumps back into the corner, almost like a child messing around. She repeats this, peek, retreat, peek, with an air that's hard to read. Frightened? Playful? Confused? Then she steps fully out into the hallway, moving just out of frame. For several long seconds, the elevator doors stay stubbornly open. On the video, you see nothing but an empty doorway and that distinctive checkered hallway floor. When she comes back, her body language has changed. She steps in and out, pressing her back to the wall, then to the open door frame. Her hands start to move in these strange, slow, sweeping gestures, fingers splayed. It's one of the most unsettling parts of the tape because it's so ambiguous. Is she talking to someone? Feeling something in front of her? Or are we just projecting meaning onto random movements? At one point, she stands just outside the door with her feet apart, her arms bent at odd angles, wrists loose, fingers curling and uncurling in a motion some viewers later described as casting a spell. Then abruptly, she walks away to the left and disappears from view. Only after she's gone do the elevator doors finally close. The clip runs on for a while longer, showing the elevator stopping on different floors, opening on empty hallways. There are technical quirks too. The timestamp at the bottom has been blurred, and people have argued there are jump cuts, places where the footage seems sped up or a chunk appears to be missing. Some online sleuths estimate that as much as 53 seconds might be gone, possibly to hide the presence of another person. Police have never given a detailed public explanation for the edits. The most straightforward possibilities are that they were redacting other guests' faces for privacy or compressing the clip for release, but those blank spots became fertile ground for suspicion. From the moment LAPD posted the video, it took on a life of its own. Within days, it had millions of views across YouTube and Chinese video platforms. People watched it over and over, frame by frame, freezing on her hands, on the reflection in the elevator doors, on a blurry patch near the bottom that some insisted was the edge of someone else's shoe. The case wasn't just a missing person anymore, it was a viral puzzle, and Elisa, who'd been a real, complicated human being, became the elevator girl. You can almost feel the cognitive machinery kicking in when you watch it. Your brain wants a pattern that makes sense. She's hiding from someone, she's on drugs, she's possessed. The video is ambiguous enough that whatever you're predisposed to believe, you can probably see. That's classic confirmation bias, the tendency to notice and remember details that back up the story we already have in our heads. Couple that with curiosity, the amateur detective mindset of wanting to solve the mystery yourself, and you've got a perfect viral storm. While the internet dissected every pixel, the physical reality at the Cecil kept getting stranger. Guests began complaining about low water pressure. Some said the water coming from the taps and showers was dark, almost black, and had a strange taste. On the morning of February 19th, about 3 weeks after Elisa was last seen, a maintenance worker named Santiago Lopez went up to the roof to check the water tanks. These are big, industrial tanks, about 1,000 gallons each, sitting on metal platforms. He climbed up, reached one of the tanks, and noticed that the hatch on top wasn't fully secured. When he looked inside, he saw a body floating face up in the water. It was Elisa Lam. The tank had to be drained and cut open to recover her remains. The hatch on top was too small for standard equipment to pull her out intact. When the coroner's team examined her, they found she was nude, with clothing similar to what she wore in the elevator video floating near her. Her room key and watch were inside the tank as well. Her body was moderately decomposed and bloated from being in water for weeks, which complicated some of the later forensic analysis. In the United States, especially in a big county like Los Angeles, suspicious or unexplained deaths fall under the medical examiner, coroner's office. In Elisa's case, the initial cause of death was listed as deferred, while they waited for toxicology and microscopic studies. When the final autopsy report was released in June 2013, the official finding was accidental drowning, with bipolar disorder as a significant condition contributing to her death. There were no signs of physical trauma, no evidence of sexual assault, and no illegal drugs or alcohol in her system. Some of her prescribed psychiatric medications were present, but at levels suggesting she might not have been taking them exactly as prescribed in the days leading up to her death. For many people, that explanation, accidental drowning, complicated by mental illness, felt deeply unsatisfying. And to be fair, there are genuinely puzzling elements. The doorways leading to the roof from inside the hotel were reportedly locked and alarmed. Guests weren't supposed to be up there. The tanks were high up, with heavy lids. It's hard to picture a 21-year-old with no equipment climbing up and getting into one by herself. And there's the dog detail. If she had already been on the roof or in the tank when the dogs searched, how did they not catch her scent? Investigators and later documentary makers have offered plausible answers, even if they can't be proven beyond doubt. The roof could be accessed from outside via fire escape. In a dense downtown core, you can often climb up from lower balconies or stairwells. Once on the roof, a determined person could drag a ladder or climb the tank via side structures. As for the lid, the maintenance worker who found her said the hatch was open when he arrived, so Elisa would not have had to close it from inside. And cadaver or scent dogs are not magical. They can miss a body if conditions aren't right, especially if it's inside a mostly sealed metal tank or if the search is brief. None of that removes all doubt, but it does show how some of the anomalies can have mundane explanations. To understand why the internet wasn't satisfied, it helps to zoom back to that building again. The Cecil was already infamous. It had a long history of suicides, people jumping from upper floors to the street below, and of violent deaths. It housed, at different times, 2 serial killers. It sat on the edge of Skid Row, in a part of downtown LA that many Americans think of as a symbol of urban decay. 10 encampments, addiction, untreated psychosis, poverty. Whether you believe in curses or not, it's easy to see how a story about a young woman dying in a water tank on the roof of that hotel was going to plug into something in people's imaginations. So let's talk about the competing stories that grew up around Elisa's death. On one side, you have the official explanation. She had a severe mental illness. Her medication was not at full therapeutic levels. She experienced some kind of psychotic or manic episode that made her disorganized and fearful, and she ended up on the roof in a tank and drowned. On the other side, you have a whole ecology of theories: murder, cover-up, supernatural forces, secret biological experiments, fed by that eerie elevator video. Start with the official narrative and why mental health advocates say it's at least plausible. Bipolar disorder isn't just about mood swings. In its more severe forms, it can involve psychosis, losing contact with reality, hearing or seeing things that aren't there, feeling like you're being followed, or that objects and people carry special, ominous meanings. In a deep dive on Elisa's case from a mental health perspective, some clinicians pointed out that her elevator behavior, pressing buttons erratically, moving in and out of the cab, gesturing at nothing visible, apparent changes in emotion, is not inconsistent with someone in a psychotic or manic state, especially if they've recently reduced or stopped medications. Her toxicology report suggested exactly that. Some of her prescribed meds were present at lower than expected levels, others she'd apparently skipped. Her prior hospitalizations and her own blog entries show that she had struggled before. Put that together, and one picture that emerges is of a vulnerable young woman traveling alone, in a chaotic environment like the Cecil, having an episode that, in another setting, might have led to a hospital visit, but in this hotel, was just written off as weird guest behavior. The internet, however, quickly split into camps that didn't like that explanation at all. For some, the core assumption was, she looks like she's hiding from someone. They pointed out how she peeks into the hallway, ducks back, presses herself into the corner. Maybe she was being chased. Maybe the person was just outside the door, out of frame. If that's your starting point, then other facts get interpreted to match. The blurred timestamp must mean police are hiding something. The sluggish elevator doors must mean someone is manipulating the controls. That's our old friend, confirmation bias again. Others focused on the hotel itself. If serial killers once stayed there, if other deaths happened there, then surely that dark energy must still be present. Some viewers decided Elisa was playing a so-called elevator game, an urban legend of Korean origin where pressing buttons in a certain sequence supposedly allows you to travel to a different dimension or summon spirits. Others said her hand movements looked like she was communicating with a ghost. The Cecil's track record of real-world violence made it easy for supernatural explanations to feel more fitting than a flawed, human one. Then there were the more out-there theories. Around the time of Elisa's death, there was an outbreak of tuberculosis in the Skid Row area. Coincidentally, one of the TB tests being used in some studies was called the LAM ELISA assay, LAM for lipoarabinomannan, a component of the TB bacterium cell wall, and ELISA for enzyme-linked immunosorbent assay, a common lab testing technique. It's a standard acronym in microbiology, and the test had existed for years. But once someone online noticed that the words LAM and ELISA appeared together in a TB test, some corners of the internet spun that into a conspiracy. Maybe management or the government were covering up a TB outbreak at the hotel, and Elisa's death was part of some experiment. There has never been any credible evidence for that. Another rabbit hole involved the elevator video itself. People slowed it down, sped it up, stabilized it, changed the contrast. Some claimed to see ghostly figures in the reflection of the elevator walls. Others tracked her foot placement and decided that a faint shadow near the door must be someone else standing just out of frame. To them, any inconsistency in the tape's timing was proof of tampering. To others, especially those familiar with how police redact and compress surveillance for public release, those same quirks looked like the messy result of analog video being prepared for web upload. Again, the same raw footage fed totally different conclusions depending on what viewers expected to see going in. Where the story takes a much darker turn is in how internet detectives began pointing fingers at real people. A Mexican metal musician who performs under the name Morbid had once stayed at the Cecil and uploaded a music video years before Elisa's trip, full of horror imagery and references to death. That was enough for some online sleuths. They ignored the fact that he had a rock-solid alibi. He was in Mexico at the time of Elisa's disappearance, and flooded his channels with death threats and accusations of murder. He has since spoken about how the harassment wrecked his mental health and career. This is a good example of how a community that thinks of itself as seeking justice can cross over into doing real harm to an innocent person. Meanwhile, offline, the legal system did what it usually does in a case like this. In September 2013, Elisa's parents filed a wrongful death lawsuit against the hotel. In American civil law, that's a way for families to argue that a property owner or business failed in a duty to keep guests reasonably safe. They claimed the hotel should have secured or locked the water tanks, or otherwise made that rooftop area inaccessible to guests. If Elisa hadn't been able to get to the tanks, they argued, she would still be alive. The hotel's defense was that the rooftop was off limits, the doors were locked and alarmed, and they couldn't reasonably foresee that a guest would somehow climb up and get inside a tank. After reviewing the evidence, a Los Angeles Superior Court judge agreed with the hotel and dismissed the case. In the judge's view, under California premises liability law, the hotel couldn't be held liable for a danger in an area where guests weren't meant to be and that, in their eyes, wasn't obviously accessible. It's a dry, legalistic answer, but it's important. When the one setting where all the conspiracy theories could have been tested, civil discovery in court, ran its course, nothing emerged to suggest foul play or a cover-up by hotel staff. Years later, the story would get yet another layer when Netflix released the docuseries Crime Scene: The Vanishing at the Cecil Hotel in 2021. The series walks through the case, the hotel's history, and the online obsession, featuring interviews with the former manager, web sleuths, and experts. It brought renewed attention to Elisa's story, but it also drew criticism for leaning too heavily on wild theories and dramatization, even while trying to debunk them. Some reviewers argued that in its eagerness to explore the mystery, the documentary risked re-traumatizing the Lam family and amplifying debunked speculation. At the same time, writers focusing on mental health tried to reclaim the conversation. They pointed out that, beyond the eerie aesthetics of that elevator video, this was a case about a young woman with bipolar disorder navigating an under-resourced mental health system, traveling alone, and ending up in a place where strange behavior simply blended into the background. In that reading, the real horror isn't a ghost in a haunted hotel. It's how easy it is for someone in crisis to slip through the cracks when their environment normalizes suffering. So where does that leave us? If we strip away the embellishments and focus just on verified facts, here's the timeline we can stand on. Elisa Lam, 21, travels from Vancouver to California in January 2013. She has a documented history of bipolar disorder and depression and is on multiple psychiatric medications. She arrives in LA January 28th and checks into the Cecil/Stay on Main, initially sharing a room before being moved to a single because of odd behavior. On January 31st, she's seen at a nearby bookstore and later appears in that now famous elevator video. She fails to check out as planned and stops calling home. She is reported missing. Police search the hotel with dogs but don't find her. On February 13th, LAPD releases the elevator footage to the public. It goes viral worldwide. On February 19th, after complaints about water pressure and discoloration, a maintenance worker discovers her body in a rooftop water tank with the hatch open. The tank is drained and cut open. She is recovered nude with her clothes and belongings in the water. The autopsy finds no physical trauma, no sexual assault, and no recreational drugs. The official cause of death is ruled accidental drowning, with bipolar disorder as a significant contributing factor. A wrongful death suit against the hotel is later dismissed on the grounds that her death was not reasonably foreseeable by the property owners. All the other layers, the TB test coincidences, the theories about demons and curses, the internet's obsession with the missing seconds of footage, live on top of that skeleton as speculation. Some are honestly motivated attempts to solve what feels unsolved. Others drift into entertainment or outright fantasy. And that's maybe the most uncomfortable part for us as viewers. Stories like this hit a lot of triggers at once. The fear of unexplained death, the allure of a creepy location with a dark past, the frustration of an ending that doesn't tie everything up in a bow. Humans hate loose ends. Faced with an explanation that feels emotionally unsatisfying, a combination of mental illness, bad luck, and an unsafe environment, we reach for one that feels bigger, more intentional, even if it's less supported by evidence. Someone must have done this. Something must be at work here. At the same time, our brains are drawn to fairness. If we sense an injustice, like a young woman dying alone in a water tank while a hotel profits, we want a villain we can point to. That's the same instinct that fueled the harassment of morbid and other innocent people who were convenient fits for a narrative. It's why that elevator clip still circulates on compilation channels, sometimes stripped of context, turning Elisa's last known moments into a horror meme instead of the evidence log of a real case. So, was Elisa Lam murdered? Is the Cecil Hotel haunted? Or is this a deeply tragic, deeply human story about mental illness, systemic neglect, and the way the internet turns grief into a puzzle box? On paper, the official ruling stands: accidental drowning, no evidence of homicide. That doesn't answer every question, and it doesn't erase the eerie feeling you may still get watching that elevator video. But it does mean that, at least for now, there is no solid evidence of a killer hiding just out of frame. What we can say with certainty is that Elisa Lam was more than a viral clip. She was a daughter who called her parents every day from the road, a student trying to balance her studies and her health, a young woman who loved books, fashion, and sharing her thoughts online. Her story deserves to be told with that in mind, with compassion for her, her family, and others who live with bipolar disorder and travel alone in a world that's not always built to keep them safe. As you sit with this case, I'd invite you to do what the best true crime communities try to do. Stay curious, but stay kind. It's natural to have theories. Maybe you still lean toward foul play. Maybe you find the official explanation more convincing. Let me know which details you think matter most, and what you make of that elevator footage down in the comments. But as you share your thoughts, let's avoid naming or targeting private individuals. And remember, there's a family out there who never asked for their daughter's death to become an internet legend.